All right, super special day for me because I get to have a conversation with one of my favorite dietitians in the whole wide world, Nick Barringer, recently retired from the military, and really the gentleman who wrote the book on tactical nutrition, so to speak. So, we are going to have a conversation today about cognitive nutrition, but I would encourage you to go back and listen to our previous podcast that we did, where Nick and I got the opportunity to talk about what it means to fuel the high mileage tactical athlete. And so I know some of you guys out there, some of my listeners, you're starting to get into those high mileage years. So I would encourage you to take it from the expert. Go check it out. But today, let's kind of talk about what athletes in the tactical realm can do to improve their cognitive and mental performance through nutrition and supplementation. So, Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you to essentially give us like a rundown of what are some of your best advice for these tactical athletes. If you want to give just like a short hello to the group and reintroduce yourself, that'd be great too.
Yeah, hey everyone. And Susan, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I love following your work. I was just complimenting Susan on all the great things she does for the tactical community. And as a fellow dietitian, really appreciate it. I fall into that high mileage category at my age now, so certainly looking for things to do. I'm a nutritionist dietitian as well, a nutrition physiologist. I have a company in Creatine, which looks at human performance, and basically we're trying to help individuals, both tactical athletes, but now I'm getting more into corporate athletes, executive athletes, everybody kind of be the best version of themselves. And one of the things that become one of the key points that I discuss with a lot of folks now is cognition, or my cognitive athletes, because even if you're a tactical athlete listening to this, as you kind of age or move up in rank, a lot less of your time is spent in the field or, doing the actual physical things. You still need to be able to do it. That's important, but a lot more time in front of a computer screen, right? Making decisions and trying to make the best decisions possible. So that's kind of where I've been focused lately. As far as some simple nutrition practices that individuals listening to this can do, and this is one big one that I think the weather dictates. Susan's there in Georgia, I'm here in Texas, is you got to hydrate. Take a drink of water. When I say that, people think of hydration and just thermoregulation, typically, right? Or maybe even is a way to prevent overeating. Sometimes I know some folks, they mistake thirst for hunger. A target that I always shoot for, Susan, you can tell me if you do anything different, is half your body weight in ounces per day. That's a good baseline. I realize it'll vary based on activity, or you're rucking or you're running, weighing yourself pre and post. But some recent literature that got me really excited about hydration is stress response. And this might be an area that people aren't tracking. I can't remember the author of the paper, so we'll have to get that in the show notes later. But the gist of it is there's something called a Trier social stress test, where individuals come into a room, they have three basic judges in front of them, they're given a topic to discuss, and it's timed. And this has been shown to cause stress in humans. It's been repeated several times. And I think if anybody's had to give a talk and you're kind of like, okay, what do I say next? And you run out of things to say, and all these judges are going to do, they're going to look at you and go, keep going, and keep looking at their clock. So we know this causes stress. So what these researchers did is they had people do this test either after they had consumed that day 1 liter of water, or I think it was around 4.2 liters of water. So they were adequately hydrated. And they had them go through this stressor, and they actually drew blood and looked at cortisol response in the blood. And fascinating enough, the individuals who were adequately hydrated, who had consumed that 4 liters of water, had 30% lower rise in cortisol.
Wow. So what I'm hearing you say, Nick, is that if I'm going before a military board, I should probably make sure that I'm well hydrated.
Yes. And I work with some other clients that work in, security settings and things like that. And we kind of laugh about this because I'm like, everybody works in a stressful environment. Everybody listening to this, like, we all have stress. And to think our water bottle or just our hydration, something simple as making sure we stay on top of our hydration, can help our stress response throughout the day. is huge. I mean, for parents, for everybody, is huge. And I find it's a stronger selling point than the thermoregulation piece because people kind of know they're like, yeah, I should probably drink more water. I don't want to overheat, but I'm inside. It's, it's air conditioned. I'm not that stressed about it. But when I talk to them about their cortisol levels and how you can maintain that, a lot of people get on the hydration train.
Yeah, I think that's important. I love that because sometimes when I talk to people about like, hey, like another good example would be like your vitamins, right? Like,
Mm.
why are they important? Why do your micro minerals, why do they matter? And people respond so much better to understanding why they need them. If I'm like, hey, just eat your vegetables because they're good for you, versus like, hey, these are like the cofactors that your body needs in order for you to do all these metabolic functions, and kind of go down the rabbit hole there. But so I love that. I think a lot of people can, like, the stress like factor resonates with a lot of people. So I love that.
Yeah, and so hydration would be the basic. And what's nice is everybody listening to this, I'm assuming, has access to water. So this is a no cost, like this is your no cost takeaway. After that, nutrition plays a role in it. And I won't go into the, too much because I think it's probably been discussed before or whatever. An overall kind of healthy diet. Hey, you're getting your fruits, you're getting your vegetables, you're getting those things. You can certainly look up the Mind diet that's been, researched for this for cognitive function. But some components of that we might highlight that, I think we even discussed in the high mileage athlete is obviously omega-3 fatty acids when we're talking about brain health. Most individuals are not getting enough omega-3 fatty acids. And this is one, hey, I'm a food first person, just like I'm sure Susan is as well. So, hey, I would love for somebody to listen to this and say, okay, I need omega-3s. Go eat your salmon, go eat your sardines, go do all that. But I'm also realistic, and I was actually part of a research team where we looked at this at West Point and Naval Academy, where we either offered more fish, and we did this at West Point, or the Naval Academy just did omega-3 supplementation. And guess which one was more effective?
Yeah, definitely
The
the
omega-3
omega 3s.
supplementation. Because come to find out, people who don't like fish, even if they know it's good for them and you educate them, they're probably not going to eat more fish. It's a hard sell. So this is one where if you are not eating fish, get you some omega-3 supplements and you kind of get what you pay for. The key is, making sure you're getting 1 to 2 grams of that DHA and EPA. If you're, especially my breachers listening to this, people that might be exposed to blast, overpressure, tactical athletes who do combatives, head injuries, then it's really important because it's been shown to possibly help with that recovery. It's, in animal models, it's been shown time and time again.
Yeah.
Humans
Can
are a little harder. Yeah.
And I'm gonna branch off of that for a little
Please
bit,
do.
just a second, because I want to ask you a question because I get this question all the time. Is plant omega threes versus animal omega threes? Like, what can we expect as far as if one is better than the other, and if we're using a plant based omega versus an animal, is there a difference in the dosage?
Are you talking about ALA versus like DHA and
Yes,
EPA?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so you're not going to get the conversion. And this is something, even when I was doing my research at Texas A&M, we looked at and kind of went through the literature, and I think the conversion rate to EPA was like maybe 3% if you're lucky. DHA was less than 1%. So you have to consume the docahexanoic acid and eicosapentaenoic acid. Do you just have to get it through fish? No, you could get it through algae. That's what the fish get it from, and they eat it. So certainly you could do that. But it is important, hey, chia seeds are great. I like chia seeds, eat them, but you need that EPA and DHA. So that's really what the literature shows. And for brain health, the DHA is most important. There was just a paper, I don't want to get into it too much, that because again, it was just one animal study that EPA might not be beneficial, and it hinted towards possible some detriments right after a brain injury. So the DHA is most important. So ones that I've seen, like particularly for that, are kind of a 2-to-1 ratio DHA to EPA. If you can find that in a supplement, there are companies that make a DHA only algae supplement. I know for a fact it's out there, so that might look for something. If you're really looking for that kind of brain health, or I'm not giving medical advice, but post-concussive, you're looking for a treatment. You had an injury, you were at a breaching course, and you're trying to kind of recover from that. There are different protocols out there. I would look for Dr. Mike Lewis. If you look at Barry, I'm going to mess up this acronym. What is it? The Brain Health Education Research Institute. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and Dr. Michael Lewis has his book, of course, too, When Brains Collide, which is a
Thank
good
you.
uh
Yeah, so he has a protocol which I've used with athletes. So you can look at that and then use that. And basically, it's a high gram. Immediately after the insult, I think you're going like 8 grams a day or 10 grams a day, and then after 2 weeks you go 8, and you titrate back down to kind of the typical 2 to 3 grams a day dose
yeah.
for that.
Yeah. And that's something that typically, like if I'm working with someone who's, going to be putting a lot down range, if, blast over pressure, parachute landing falls, that's typically something that I would say, hey, like, there's some research out there, potentially using it prophylactically or after even a mild incident could help with any recovery needs that you have, right? Especially and you're probably going to go into this, but whenever there's an energy crisis kind of in the with the brain, we want to provide those nutrients that the brain needs and then any energy we can as well. So if we're incorporating those omega-3s through the fish, but then also supplementing calories, getting that DHA in, super, super important.
Yes. No, and I love it that you're talking about prophylactically. I was just on a call with a couple of medics and prior 18 deltas who are working this in the civilian side of like a one kind of stop shop solution for getting all those nutrients in, which I was excited about. And we were talking about this prophylactically. And I do want to give a shout out to a good colleague that Dr. Will Conkright and I in 2012 wrote a paper for the Journal of Special Operations Medical Association, basically saying, hey, we should probably be doing this, making a case for omega-3s in TBIs. So hopefully, it's getting traction, and it seems to be a standard of care, at least from the recovery process. I would certainly like to see more done prophylactically. And as part of that, mentioning the energy crisis, obviously creatine monohydrate,
Mm-hmm.
right? We've got to throw in there. At this point in the research, I don't know. Do we even say like, is there anything that creatine cannot do? That's a better research question.
uh,
You know, at this point, there's definitely, I mean, great researchers, Dr. Darren Kandau, Dr. Scott Forbes. Who else is out there, creatine? I mean, my advisor, Dr. Richard Kreider, obviously did a lot, and so it's exciting to see all that, but particularly with the recovery processes, yes, you want that creatine because our brain loves to run off of glucose, and even though it's only 2% of our body, it uses 20% of our energy, and that glucose can be disrupted when we kind of get that impact. So creatine can be used as a fuel source to repair it. And what's also nice for the cognitive athlete is, again, stress, but usually what goes along with stress and working long hours is we forget to sleep, or our 3-year-old kicks us in the middle of the night all night, and we're sleep deprived, and now we got to make decisions. And creatine, two big recent papers have shown with sleep deprivation, creatine being a benefit, that it can help with numeric processing, word recall, reaction time. I will say this though, the dose is much higher for the cognitive benefits. So the
mm-hmm.
dose was, I think, what, 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So for an individual like me, you're looking at like 30 grams taking
Yeah.
it in. So there was just a recent paper that they did 0.2, so a little lower, but still the bottom line, you're going to have to take higher doses. So I would tell somebody double or triple your creatine dose for the cognitive benefits if you're going to use it.
Mm-hmm. And then also just looking at like that potential recovery for concussion or mild TBI. Again, some of the research is pointing towards we're going to do that high dose omega-3, 9 to 10 grams. We're going to do that 20 plus
Yeah.
grams of creatine per day at the measurement that you just mentioned based on weight uh, in that week after injury. I just want to make sure that I'm expressing
Mhm.
this correctly. And then we'll titrate down throughout the course of maybe 3 to 4 weeks or as symptoms kind of resolve
Yeah.
potentially.
No, I mean, I think it's a great strategy, and it's been shown to be effective. And then the other one I would look at that obviously I've talked about in research is like the vitamin D. That's also you got vitamin D receptors in your brain and your muscle as well. But since we're talking about cognition, vitamin D being very important for cognitive health even mood. Paper was led by one of my students, Kelly Shad, who I think is still on active duty out there. Hopefully, she's a brilliant student, and I'm sure is doing great things as a brilliant dietitian. But we were able to pull data from medical treatment facilities starting in Texas all the way up to Alaska, looking at depression and vitamin D deficiency diagnosis, and we found that relationship, and it only got stronger the further you went north. Susan is, previously being stationed at Fort Lewis. I'm sure you can
Yes.
relate to that.
Yes, I am very much. I don't know if you ever go back and watch the previous episode, you can definitely see the different shades of. I'm much more tan living down here in the South versus
Did your
you
vitamin D
know
levels go up?
they did actually. They were actually, and I'm slightly ashamed to admit this, but my vitamin D levels, I had them checked before I left Washington or right after I left Washington as we came down to Georgia, and they were surprisingly low. Not surprisingly,
Right.
but as a dietitian, I feel like they should have been higher. However, I definitely have seen an increase in my vitamin D levels being here. I've also, of course, just been making sure that I'm supplementing with my vitamin D. But definitely I did see a difference. Admittedly too, I think I was dealing with this is just, I'm going off on a sidebar now. Dealing with some like potential seasonal depression
Yeah.
and, I admittedly, after we moved to the South, it's been a couple of years now being back down here. I would say my husband and I both have noticed like a noticeable difference just in our day to day moods.
It's a thing. As
Yeah.
somebody who we loved our time stationed outside of Boston, we were in Natick, Massachusetts. We loved our time, on the Hudson, stationed there at West Point. However, I remember a point in May, and maybe it was 2021, right around that time. We did our interview, going outside, and it snowed in May,
Mm.
and I was just like, I just remember this feeling of being like, I'm over it. I'm like, I'm over it. And then on the flip side, I live here in Houston. Now, there are hot days. I question decisions, but in
Yeah.
December, going out in t-shirt and shorts and going for a run or a ruck and be like, this is amazing. So
Yes.
yeah, it's a thing.
Yes. Absolutely. So big fan of the vitamin D here. And it's so difficult to get through food. I mean, there's really like,
It's challenging.
it is really challenging. And it's also just challenging. Like, none of us are really outside enough at the right time of day with the right sun exposure. I feel like, even if you're living in the South sometimes,
Yeah.
to get enough vitamin D.
No, that was one of my so for my dissertation we used soldiers at Fort Hood. So
Mhm.
Plain, Texas, some of the most sun you're going to get, right, in that environment in the US, and still 40% were insufficient or deficient in vitamin D. So it's a thing. Like it's
Yeah.
just really hard to get.
Yeah. Especially now coming out of winter and coming out of
Yeah.
spring. That's when we would see a lot of, the vitamin D levels, just like the average across, a unit just drop is kind of coming right out of that winter time, of course. Oh, sorry. I was going to ask you a question. My mind just went blank for a second. I remember what it was. Vitamin D levels, a lot of times when people go get their vitamin D
Mhm.
tested, 30 is kind of like the clinical norm. But let's talk
Yeah.
about what it potentially should look like, especially for tactical athletes.
I like 50 to 80.
Hmm.
What is that? Nanograms per deciliter. So that's where I'm at. And what's so great, and I'll give a shout out to a great colleague, Dan Garner, because this is the discussions we have and we'll be having next week. I don't know when this comes out, but we're going to the H2F symposium and we talked to the Special Operations Medical Association about this. Is regular blood work to look at levels, and we're going off of what's optimal. So he's taken data that he's been used with his professional golfers, MMA fighters, football players, basketball players, and we're finding, okay, what does the literature say is you're having optimal function, optimal cognitive function, optimal physical function, all like that. And that's the window or bandwidth we're looking at versus, I'm sure everybody listening to this, you've had your blood work done, you get a report back, and it's binary. It's like you're either sick or not sick. Well,
Yeah.
some of us want to be better than not sick. And so for that, I would say the literature points to 50 to 80 around that. Now, vitamin D, you got to respect it. It's a fat soluble vitamin. You can overdo it. That's why you always want to measure, and I wouldn't just say dose blind, because if you're at 15, maybe you should be taking 50,000 IUs a day, and that's probably what you'd get prescribed. But if you're already at 50 or 80 and you're taking 50,000 IUs a day, that's problematic. So understanding that and knowing your numbers, and so that would be the other thing with cognitive athletes listening to this. You really want to improve cognition is get regular blood tests. And for the Department of War, what I would like to see happen, and Susan, I don't know if you can or can't speak on this. I would like to see blood work get decoupled from the medical system. I think that's the challenge. So if you order blood, I imagine you've got a, Martin or the nearest lab there. Some places you're going to have to go get the physician to order it. So it's another step or a potential burden. Some labs, they're just not equipped to do, they're not equipped to do a battalion. Like most labs, they would be overwhelmed. That poor lab officer would be calling Susan up and going, I mean, I know for my Fort Hood study, which is pretty big, Darnell's a medical center. Just for that, I coordinated specifically with the lab officer who was wonderful. I can't think of his name. He was amazing, but I had to coordinate just to do 100 samples of vitamin D at once.
Yeah.
Like, think about that. So that's what people don't understand. So I think it should be decoupled and then put on the economy, because we have the LabQuest, we have the LabCorp, you have all these big things that are used to drawing hundreds and hundreds of labs and running analysis. And then that gives a tool to the dietitians, to those providers, to optimize performance, just not keep people from sick. The medicine stuff's important, but those labs are we're trying to figure out what's wrong with you, where I feel like a practitioner like you, Susan, you're looking at like, okay, how can I take you to the next level? Pause there. Say anything crazy?
No. And I think that's a really important distinction. And so, like, even as a performance dietitian working with medical providers, I think one of the things we always try to get across is like, hey, listen, we're not trying to take over that role, right? And so the doctor is really looking at those values for critical indicators of any type of acute distress, injury. That's medical, that's all them. When we're looking at it, that's what we're looking for. How can we optimize nutrition lab values? How can we optimize performance? How can we optimize health beyond just being good enough, right? And so I completely agree. It's just to put it into perspective for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with military units. Some of your smallest battalions are going to have 800 people in them, and some of your largest brigades are going to have 5,000 to 6,000 people in them. So when we're talking about like the smaller military facilities being overwhelmed, I mean, that's absolutely the case. The labs are not going to be equipped to manage a huge influx of lab testing, especially if you have multiple units on an installation. So I will say that I think more individuals I see who are part of this system do tend to go out and get their labs independently quite frequently too, as they become more affordable. Because people are ordering them directly for themselves, right? Whether that be good or bad, I don't necessarily have an opinion on that, but I think there could be an opportunity there to just enhance that process and move from sick care to like optimal care, right?
Yes, I love it. No, I mean, yeah, you said it. Since I've been I've seen a $1,200 lab panel go down to, $500-$600, like half in some of these cases. And so that's what's really exciting. And then if you look at the cost, using like the brigade, if we said 3,000 soldiers, I think I ran the analysis. If you did it entirely on the economy, right? If you did that, so you didn't have to worry about DHA, you didn't have to worry about that burden, et cetera. And you did quarterly, because I say quarterly because if you look at like breachers and certain people like overpressure, you want to track that because they tend to have a metabolic fingerprint before they have issues of like cognitive decline. And so catching that's very important. So if you were to do it quarterly and look at, 123 biomarkers, all like that, it's less than what it costs to like upgrade or like one of the upgrade packages for an Abrams tank. One. Yeah. So when you put it in that perspective, this is kind of my thesis and my passion now that I'm out of the uniform, because I can say it more strongly, in that we always say, what's one of the soft truths? And even Big Army believes this, right? Humans are more important than hardware. I have heard tons of general officers say this. And so I am trying to frame this to be like, all right, if they're more important than hardware, one of our little tanks, if we upgrade it, not to purchase all of that, but we could do a brigade and get quarterly. Now we could cut that down to okay, twice a year, whatever. But I'm saying to get a full panel so we can really track these people's health and performance and optimize it. To me, we got to put our money where our mouth is at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even take it one step further and say, if, even if we're not at that point where we want to do quarterly yet, I think initial entry,
Yes.
early leadership career, senior leadership, and there needs to be specific time points for sure, because there's definitely situations in not just in the military, but I think across all the professions that I've worked with where people aren't getting their labs done until they're in their late 30s and 40s.
Right before they
Ever.
retire.
I'm like, how have you gone your entire life and you've never had a lab panel done? Like, if you're listening to this right now, and you're a full-fledged adult, not even in your 40s, just like an
Yeah.
adult, like you have an adult job with adult money and, insurance or not. If you haven't had a full lab panel done, I don't think that's something that you need to skimp on.
Yes, I'm glad you said. I'm with some of the clients I work with outside. Like I'm working with an individual right now who's like 20, and he sees the value, and I convince him because one of the things that how I frame this, because and somebody maybe listen to this at 20 or listen to this, I feel great now. I'm awesome. I'm crushed. Like there's nothing wrong with me. I feel great. I'm like, good. Let's get a baseline because that's the other thing with these labs that we know is what's normal for me is not going to be normal for the individual next to me. Classic example, like testosterone. If you look at those testosterone windows, what is it? 300 to 900 or 800 in some. And the cutoff for treatment for some providers, I think is below 250. But
it's below 200 in some cases.
Below 200 in some cases. Mm-hmm. But again, so if at your prime, you were an upper end, you were an 850, 900, and now you're at a 400. So you're 200 off to get treatment, but you had the data to show, no, I am 400 off my norm or what my prime. One, you could maybe explore and say, oh, what's going on? Something's triggering this. But then two, I think you make a better case for maybe intervention or some sort of treatment because you know what's normal to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I will even say that I have seen a case personally that I dealt with, not associated with the military, but an athlete had come to me. It was like a group of them. They were, buddies. They were getting all their lab work done. And they wanted to do it together. Mid-20s, didn't think that anything was wrong. And then we got labs back, and one gentleman's hormone panel was extremely low, below the threshold. Didn't really ever know what good felt like. So then, of course, went to his doctor, his medical provider, and found out that there was some other things happening in the body. Again, I'm not going to go into details, that was causing those low hormone levels, but would have had no idea for who knows how long.
That was that person's norm, right? Even if they weren't feeling great, like if that's your norm and you think, okay, this is as good as I can feel. And like, to your point, you get data that says, hey, let's investigate this. And then all of a sudden you take the lid off of performance and feeling. It's like, holy smokes, I can feel like this all the time. People don't even know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're dealing, again, we're kind of going off on a tangent, but to bring it back, when you're dealing with altered, whether it be endocrine or something else going on with your labs, that is absolutely going to affect cognition. So even if we're looking at just like, your day-to-day memory recall, right? We know that there's relationships between your hormones and the way that your brain functions. We know that there's relationships between, just the whole endocrine system. But he didn't know that he could go through the day feeling mentally alert compared to where he was. Because again, his baseline was terrible. So when he had his labs done, he was able to kind of make some improvements in his lifestyle, which included supplementation and working with his provider to make sure that he could function optimally.
Great. So cognitive nutrition, I think we covered some of the big rocks with that basics. Did we want to get into some of the other kind of specifics way to optimize performance or?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I'm hearing a lot about, and we've kind of chatted about this a little bit too, is just those things beyond basic nutrition,
Mhm.
and kind of the basics that we've covered in supplementation that are going to help improve blood flow, oxygen delivery, and just sort of give you that nootropic effect. And I think there's a lot of them out there, but I think there's very few that actually work in the way that people would like them to work. And so I want to kind of rehash like maybe some of our conversations that we've had on the side about some things that we can utilize to do that. And I know you have developed Salvo gum, which I definitely want to talk about because I actually got to use some of it and I'm a huge fan. And so I want to talk about what's in that, and I want to talk about how it can potentially help tactical athletes, and then if there's any other supplementation we want to go into beyond that, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think so. When we look at cognitive performance, obviously one of the ones that we haven't talked about yet, kind of ergogenic aids, or if you will, is like, caffeine, right? And that's one everybody's utilizing. Every sleep deprived parent, tactical athlete, we're using these. And so what got me going down this road was I would use the caffeinated gum in the first strike ration. If anybody listening to this remembered, and I thought it was a very convenient way to get caffeine because sometimes you can't always get access to coffee, and then the dosing of the coffee, who brewed it, et cetera. And then at the time, even downrange, it's like, you know, Rippets weren't everywhere. There were a lot of places, but you couldn't get them. And so a caffeinated gum you could just carry in your cargo pocket, really easy, pop it open and go. And even after outside of the military working with athletes, I just found it was a great tool that they throw it in their bag. You can go through security. And then if you need that caffeine burst, you chew it and you're good to go. What I didn't always love was the dosing was 100 milligrams, which I found to be like pretty potent because I work with a variety of people. Myself, I could do 100 milligrams. I could do 200 milligrams, two pieces. But there were some individuals that were like, that's too much. Like it was just, a smaller frame, caffeine sensitive. And
Mm-hmm.
so I identified that issue. And so I was like, it would be great to have a dose that was lower that you could titrate up or titrate down to the individual. And so going down that road, I started looking at different solutions and came up with, okay, what if we could take a gum and get it to 40 milligrams? And then instead of the synthetic kind of caffeine anhydrous, could we get it from coffee beans? Just the kind of natural. And so I was able to find a manufacturer that could do that. But then kind of in the meantime, one of the adaptogens for performance that I was very interested in was Rhodiola rosea. I've been using it. It's kind of popular right now, you could say, in the supplement space, along with ashwagandha. I feel like those two kind of came on the scene at the same time. What's really interesting, if you look into the research of Rhodiola rosea or even the history, it was mentioned by a Greek physician in 77 CE. So over
Oh wow.
1,500 years ago, it was mentioned in a text by him. And then it was mentioned again in like 1749 in a physician text. And then where the term adaptogen and it kind of got its legs from was in 1947, a Soviet scientist started using Rhodiola rosea for the military and then the cosmonaut program. And it was even used in Afghanistan because when the Soviets were in Afghanistan, kind of like our war fighters faced going to the high altitude of the mountains, they would use Rhodiola rosea. And they found that when they took Rhodiola rosea, those soldiers did better at altitude in Afghanistan. So all this was kind of kept very close hold. Like the Soviets made it rules about standardizing the Rhodiola rosea, how much, rosavins were in the concentrate. It had to be 3% or more, like all these things. And of course, all this was only in Russian. It wasn't allowed out of Russia until the USSR fell in 1991. So kind of interesting, to come to this day. The problem with a lot of the Rhodiola rosea literature and some of the challenges when I was looking into it was back to the plant. It's a plant, so where the plant was grown, how is it treated, who harvested it, all these factors. The active ingredient, one of the key things, was this compound known as salidroside. And that salidroside in some plants could be 0.5%. In others, it could be 3%. And then because it's become so popular, it is actually an endangered plant. If you look it up, it is listed as an endangered plant currently. That you've got people trying to make it really quickly, and you're not getting sometimes good product out there. So the standard side. I say all this that I was so fascinated. I'm like, well, do I want a Rhodiola Rosea as an adaptogen to go with caffeine? But I wasn't quite sure of this until I discovered a group out of France had figured out how to produce salidroside via fermentation. And
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
and so that really got me excited. So I read all this literature on Rhodiola rosea, how it has a synergistic effect with caffeine, how it helps with altitude, all like that. And then I discovered this pure salidroside that could be made via fermentation. And there was a paper that this group published in 2024, Schwartz et al., and I can put this in your notes, but they gave 60 milligrams of salidroside versus a placebo to individuals, and they had them do exercise on a treadmill, time to exhaustion. And, they did blood work, they did a profile of mood states. And here's where it got exciting, and this is where they locked me in, is what were the findings? They found that the individuals improved oxygen utilization. So they had a higher percent predicted VO2 max when they were taking the Rhodiola rosea versus the placebo. They had reduced exercise muscle damage, which again, this was really fascinating. So when the individuals who got the placebo ran on the treadmill, myoglobin went up marker, which is to be expected. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
Susan and I went on a run tomorrow and we had our blood drawn, myoglobin's
Yeah.
going to go up. That's a marker. The salidroside groups didn't. It stayed the same. It didn't
Oh,
go up.
interesting. So it didn't really increase at all.
It didn't increase. It didn't rise in this paper, which got me excited about the tactical athlete because sadly, if you look at rhabdomyolysis, when you have
Yeah.
myoglobins go up, that it can cause renal failure. That occurs mostly at the highest rate, at least in the military,
Yeah.
because we take individuals sometimes from the couch and you got to do loaded marches, et cetera. So here's something that could protect against that. So that got me excited. The other piece of it, and this is for everybody, is it preserved the performance. So the group that got the placebo, they had decrements in their time trials to exhaustion, whereas the salidroside, they were able to maintain performance. So again, maintain performance under physical stress, and that's probably what people lock in on. But then there was one other finding that you could maybe miss if you don't read the paper. But in the profile of mood states, when the individuals were asked to run on the treadmill to exhaustion, they found that friendliness decreased and reported fatigue went up. I think that's to be expected, right?
Well,
If
sure. Yeah.
you do any exercise, we get a little grumpy, you're out of the farm art, your husband probably just experienced this here in Ranger School, you're rocking and you're like, man, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired, etc. Interesting, when they were on salidroside, friendliness didn't change. It didn't decrease, and they didn't report higher fatigue. And why that got me excited was, again, when we think about tactical athletes, any tactical athlete, it's a team sport. But any team sport athlete, part of that team cohesion to really kind of be the most effective unit you can be is being, friendly and willing to work with each other and kind of not getting inside your own head being like, oh my God, I'm tired. I feel like crap. Because the more you start internalizing, thinking about how tired and grumpy you are, the less you're able to focus on what the team needs, right?
Yeah.
And so that really excited me from the cognitive standpoint of, wow, this compound could affect how well somebody could be a team member even.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's important because, like, you have all these selections and schools that you go through where peer
Yes.
reviews are a part of whether or not you're going to pass or fail, right? And a lot of times, in a lot of cases, you could be at the top physically, but if you're not seen as a team player, right, that's a problem. So I think that's really interesting. And then, for some of my grumpy Gusses out there, maybe just something to help bring the mood up a little bit. No, I love that. It's interesting. So originally when I bought it, I was really just like, for me, I was looking for something to give me like, just give me some more focus, right? Like my brain kind of goes all over the place. And I like when I want to do deep work, I want to give myself every advantage to focus. And so for me, that's what I was looking for, is something to kind of give me that cognitive edge if I'm gonna, even if I'm sitting at my desk, right? To kind of help me focus a little bit. And so for someone who's not necessarily rucking on a regular basis or climbing up mountains or doing some of those difficult things, I like to think I'm pretty friendly. But for me, I was just looking for, right, like that cognitive piece as I'm kind of doing my day-to-day work. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that like when I used the gum, it was much more effective than a lot of oral nootropics that I had used in the past. So just I wanted to kind of just drop my personal experience in there.
No, I appreciate that. And that was part of it is, we didn't even discuss the kind of the buccal delivery of, when you chew gum, you're getting a more rapid absorption. For anybody who has not chewed caffeinated gum, it's not like drinking an energy drink or drinking a cup of coffee, because usually, okay, you drink that, you wait 30, 40 minutes, it's got to go through the gut, it's got to be absorbed, do all like that. Whereas this is getting absorbed in your mouth and it hits your system within 10 minutes,
Oh
all
yeah.
the literature shows.
Yeah.
And so it's a more immediate response. And that's why the caffeinated gum was so interested, again, for athletes, because trying to get athletes to time their beverage intake around an event can be challenging. They have a nervous stomach, or they don't, and, not everybody wants to drink a Celsius or something right before they go run or fight or ruck. And so that was, the gum was really beneficial. And even, people maybe listen to this that work in the security setting. I talked to some folks, who worked in kind of that environment where they would have to guard individuals for 12 hours at a time and they couldn't go to the bathroom. So another
Oh
case
yeah.
where coffee or energy drink is not an option, they would use the gum instead. So you get a quicker delivery, a more consistent delivery. And kind of a side note, as I've looked into the research on chewing gum, went down that rabbit hole, is just the act of chewing increases cerebral blood flow. So you talk about like that deep work and that deep, thinking. Now I chew loudly, and so my work partner, who's also my wife, sometimes complains because I like chew gum when I'm like intensely writing or thinking or whatever, and I'm chewing loud, and so I will warn that could happen depending on if you're a loud chewer, but it does help. I noticed that, okay, like I can think, I can it gets my blood flow going.
Yeah, I feel that. I'm also a gum popper. So
Yeah.
as I'm chewing, I'm popping it. And I'm also just, not to out myself, but I'm a loud chewer. I have a really bad habit of actually talking while I'm chewing. So my husband's the same way. He's, I'm a very loud chewer. I will just like another personal anecdotal
Yeah.
story too is there was like one particular day where I was actually driving home from the office, a particularly stressful day. I feel like I was kind of just like catastrophizing a little bit and like maybe had some like just like anxiety like thoughts. And I was like, you know what? I have this in my pack right now. I'm just going to pop one in and see what happens, right? Because kind of my exposure to rhodiola in the past had been as more of an adaptogen. And so I was pleasantly surprised that I felt like it brought me in a little bit. It brought me in pretty fast, actually. I think I got about 10 minutes down the road and I realized that like I actually felt a lot more calmer and I felt like I had a little bit more control over
Good.
some of my thoughts that were coming through. So that's just my personal anecdote.
Yeah, I think the
Of
literature, as we look at it, would support that. And I mean, that's some of the exciting thing about it. And I want to be clear is, somebody might see the gum or like think of caffeinated gum and they think, oh, it's a pre-workout, right? And it's like, no, no, no. And that was one of the things I wanted, was like to get people locked in without, taking 200 to 300 milligram dose of caffeine. Because again, if you look at the literature, really high doses of caffeine can just make you more stressed, right? Like
mhm,
you're awake,
yeah,
you're alert, but you're not always in the best mindset to maybe do some of that deep work that you need to do. So it's kind of finding that line between being stimulated, not overstimulated, and that's where the literature really supported that synergy between caffeine and salidroside and putting them out there. And now I would say if you look like kind of 2024 on, there's so much more literature coming out on just the salidroside compound, the isolated salidroside compound, that is really excited. A lot of it's done in animal models. Hopefully soon we're going to do another human clinical trial with Salidroside. So it come, but I mean, the animal model stuff, is really fascinating in terms of they took mice and exposed them. They put them in a hypobaric chamber and like the stress of hypoxia, because some of the, the mountain stuff, the environment, kind of that history with Rhodiola rosea. And Salidroside, they were able to see it improved brain barrier integrity and the cognitive function, like the mice were able to go through the maze and stay like that. Whereas typically, if you take a mouse and expose it, or even a human, to a lower oxygen environment, those things, the blood-brain barrier integrity can start to break down and cognitive function starts to break down. You think of altitude sickness, et cetera. So now we have, some literature pointing, and the next will be human trials of like, all right, this could be great for, people who get altitude sickness, people going to high altitude. So another kind of benefit. And then the other literature that's out there that I found very exciting, maybe for some of the endurance athletes listening to this, was that Salidroside stimulates erythropoietin.
Okay.
So it could actually, there are 2 papers that I'm aware of that say it. Now, again, I'm not saying, chew some gum and you're going to be Lance Armstrong by any. Again, if you look at the history of the Rhodiola rosea research, even going back to the Soviets, and the benefits at altitude, that makes sense, right? Mechanistically, of if I can increase your red blood cell production, your oxygen carrying capacity, that's only going to help you when you go to those higher altitudes. And then kind of going back to even the 2024 Schwartz paper I mentioned at the beginning, that kind of got me on Salidroside with the human trial. It improved time to exhaustion. That would be a mechanism that it would explain that. It's like, okay, if I increase those individuals, red blood cells and their oxygen carry capacity, they're going to be able to do more rounds on the treadmill without getting tired.
Yeah. So we're not just talking cognitive benefit here. We're talking physical performance benefits here. We're talking as a stress adaptogen here. I mean, so there's a lot of reasons that we could use something like Salidroside to just improve overall physical, mental life performance. Are there any situations in which somebody might not want to use Salidroside, or any contraindications that we need to be aware of to do our due diligence?
That's a great question, Susan. I'm glad you answered. I don't think I've been on a couple of podcasts talking about Salidroside. I think you're the first person to ask that, of course, being the tactical dietitian. And that was one of the things that I was like you, I read all these things. I'm like, all right, where's the catch? In the Schwartz trial, no adverse events. In other trials, no adverse events. I have not found that scenario. And this is where it gets exciting. So when I was looking at putting Salidroside in the gum, I'm like, well, what if, I think of Rangers. This is my time at Ranger Regiment, probably do it. What if somebody eats a whole box of gum in one sitting?
What?
Right.
Would a Ranger do that? That's what I can't imagine.
These are the things I think about. Because I remember with the gum that came in the first strike ration, people would do that. They would just throw off, 500 milligrams of caffeine right to the face. So I started looking, I was like, well, what's the lethal dose of Salidroside? What's the upper tolerable intake of Salidroside? And there isn't one.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's, now that's not a challenge, Ranger, if you look at it. But the bottom line in this scenario, if you're using this gum, like the caffeine would be more of a concern at a point of a threshold than the Salidroside.
Sure.
So as of right now, there's no literature to show that I have found. Let me put that clear. That I have found that shows that Salidroside would be contraindicated, or that you would be concerned about the dosing that you're getting from that. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, and with the amount of caffeine that's in there, I mean, I would imagine you would have to go through 3 or 4 packs of gum in like 10 minutes or less. Probably to even feel it was having an effect, right? Again, that's not a challenge to anybody.
Yeah, that's what I always said.
Right.
I don't know if you ever get that your question in the nutrition classes, but I'll get that sometimes, like how much caffeine, and I'm always like, I think the lethal, the LD50, the lethal dose that kills like 50% of the population is like 10,000 milligrams. And I'm like, that's not a challenge, but
yeah, it's insanely high.
A lot of caffeine.
You would probably, but before you even get to that amount, right? I mean, there would be
issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And caffeine is not a bad thing. We know that it can have a positive impact on performance in the right amounts. We know that it is an acceptable supplement to use if we're dealing with 24-hour shifts,
Yeah.
overnights, extended duty hours. I think it's timing and using it in the right quantities really matters. And when we're talking about 40 milligrams per serving, I mean, that's pretty small considering that most people are taking in 300 milligrams in liquid form at one
Yeah.
time, and if you're some individuals, you just, one chug and, it's gone. But yeah, I think I'm pleased to hear that like the safety panel on it or just like the upper tolerable limit is so high or just really
Yeah,
there
that we
isn't
don't even
one.
know it. I mean, this is like last, there's not even one. And again, if for those who want to nerd out, you know, drop Salidroside in your Google Scholar and start looking. And I'm telling you, it's really exciting. I mean, there's papers on, they're looking at cardiovascular and metabolic health.
Mhm.
Looking, and again, a lot of these are animal models early on, but there was one, showed increased nitric oxide production, so vasodilation, and it can modulate lipid metabolism. It can attenuate platelet aggregation. It can even, help with modulation of the gut microbiota. So there's so much more, kind of now that we've isolated this compound, Salidroside coming out, that I'm really excited about what's on the horizon for it. Even, things, other benefits that we didn't even know it did. But what we do know, like right now, what I'll hang my hat on is what I mentioned earlier, is kind of for the fatigue, for the mood, for the muscle preservation, and then for the oxygen consumption for that VO2 max.
All right, awesome. So I think we're coming up on the hour now,
Yeah.
and I know we could do this all day long, but
A
we have
part three.
lives. So as we're finishing up this one, where can I get a hold of this stuff? And then where can I find you if I have more questions?
Yes, so salvogum.com is where you can, where you can find it. Hopefully I'll drop it here. It'll be in the military supply channels soon. So, we'll definitely announce that when that happens. And then where you can find me is probably nickbarringer.phd.rdn on Instagram, or my website. You can contact me, Dr. Nick Barringer, as well. And, it's Susan, it's always a pleasure to come on here. Very, very exciting. And I got to make it to Fort Benning soon.
Yes, absolutely. I know we need to make it back to our home state as well for more than just a day at a time.
Yeah,
But I'm always so grateful when you make the time to come on here and we can chat. So looking forward to our next one. So
yeah,
hopefully we can do it sooner rather than later.
certainly. Anytime, Susan. I mean, to anybody listening to this, you found a winner as far as a dietitian. I mean, been following your work, the tactical dietitian, your community, what you're able to create with your courses and your coursework. You've done so much for tactical athletes. And so on their behalf, I thank you for all that you do and continue to do.
I appreciate that so much. So we'll talk soon and enjoy your weekend.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care.